I discovered the words "internal use now owned by Executive Holdings LLC" appearing next to my name on a patent filing, something I'd written in my kitchen at 2:17 a.m. They thought I'd panic, but I just opened my old filing cabinet, pulled out a yellowed piece of paper, and smiled. One clause they never read, but my lawyer didn't miss. And today, I walked into that meeting like I was carrying the final nail for their coffin. My name is Juliet Rowan, though everyone at Corivex Technologies calls me Jules, 34 years old, chief engineer, and for over a decade, I've poured my soul into this company's AI-powered industrial automation systems. I've watched CEOs come and go like seasonal allergies, but I remained, the constant in their ever-shifting corporate equation. That changed the moment Colton Reeve walked through our glass doors. The acquisition happened so quietly that most employees learned about it from LinkedIn updates. One day we were an independent tech firm. The next, we belonged to some shadowy investment group with Reeve at the helm. He arrived wearing a $4,000 suit and a smile that never quite reached his eyes, the kind of man who'd sell his grandmother's wedding ring if the quarterly projections demanded it. The all-hands meeting took place on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I'd just finished debugging a critical update at 3:47 a.m. and was running on my fourth espresso shot. Reeve stood at the podium, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, talking about synergies and optimization and realigning intellectual property ownership to match our new growth strategy. My fingers tightened around my coffee mug. I knew corporate speak. I'd translated enough of it over the years. What he really meant was, we're taking everything you've created and stamping our name on it. All patents developed during employment or utilizing company resources will be consolidated under Executive Holdings LLC, he announced, his laser pointer dancing across a PowerPoint slide filled with legal jargon. This restructuring will position us better for the upcoming IPO. Around me, engineers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked confused, others resigned. But I felt something else entirely, a cold, calculating calm settling over me like morning frost. The biofeedback control system, my system, the one I'd conceived during a bout of insomnia, sketched on napkins at 2 a.m. and built using my own equipment in my garage, the revolutionary AI that could predict and prevent industrial accidents before they happened, the patent that bore my name and my name alone. They wanted it, of course they did. It was worth millions, possibly billions if deployed correctly. Reeve continued his presentation, outlining timelines and transition periods. I watched him gesture enthusiastically about collaborative innovation, while mentally calculating how much my work would line his pockets. The man had been here less than a month and already believed he owned everything within these walls. He was wrong. As the meeting droned on, I pulled out my phone and typed a message to my lawyer. Ella Quinn. Just 4 words that would change everything. Check paragraph 7. Her response came within minutes. Already on it, they have no idea what's coming. I allowed myself a small smile, hidden behind my coffee mug. Reeve noticed nothing, too busy basking in his own perceived brilliance. The other engineers filed out of the conference room, heads down, spirits crushed, but I lingered, studying the man who thought he could steal from me. Impressive presentation, I said, approaching him as he packed up his laptop. He looked up, that practiced smile sliding into place. Juliet, right, I've heard great things about your work. That biofeedback system is exactly the kind of innovation we need to showcase. It is innovative, I agreed, my tone neutral. Took years to perfect. Well, it's going to take Corivex to the next level. You should be proud. Your work will be part of something much bigger now. I nodded slowly. Oh, I'm certain it will be part of something bigger. Just maybe not in the way you're expecting. His smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. CEOs like Reeve always did. I'm not sure what you mean. You will, I said, turning to leave. Give it time. As I walked back to my office, past the cubicles filled with brilliant minds now worried about their futures, I felt no guilt about what was coming. Reeve had made his choice the moment he'd decided to claim what wasn't his. He'd looked at our work, at my work, and seen only dollar signs and stock options. But he'd missed the fine print. They always did. Corporate vultures like Reeve operated on assumptions. They assumed employment meant ownership. They assumed contracts were standard. They assumed engineers were too focused on their work to protect themselves legally. They assumed wrong. I sat down at my desk and opened the bottom drawer. Pulling out a manila folder marked 2011 Employment Agreement, somewhere in those pages, buried in subsection after subsection, was a single paragraph that would bring Reeve's empire crashing down. All because he'd never bothered to read it. The folder felt heavier than its weight suggested. 12 years of foresight compressed into aging paper. I spread the employment agreement across my desk, running my finger down to page 4, section 7, subsection C. There it was, innocuous as a sleeping snake. Any patents, inventions, or intellectual property developed outside of standard working hours, using personal equipment and resources, without utilizing company facilities or proprietary information, shall remain the sole property of the employee. I remembered the day I'd insisted on that clause. November 2011. Fresh out of MIT, eager but not naive, the HR manager had laughed, when I'd asked for the addition. Planning to invent the next iPhone in your spare time, she'd joked, barely glancing at the modification. Something like that, I'd replied. They'd signed without hesitation. Why wouldn't they? I was just another engineer. And they were Corovex Technologies, a company that believed innovation only happened within their walls, during billable hours, on their equipment. Ella Quinn understood the value of that paragraph the moment I'd hired her 3 years ago. You realize this is a golden ticket, right? She'd said, reviewing my files. Most employment contracts claim everything you breathe near the office. This is beautiful. Now, as Reeve plotted to absorb my biofeedback system into his Executive Holdings LLC, that beautiful clause was about to become his nightmare. I pulled up the development logs on my personal laptop, the one I'd never connected to Corovex's network. Every breakthrough, meticulously documented. Date stamps showing work done at 11:30 p.m., 2:15 a.m., 4:47 a.m., photos of my garage workspace, receipts for equipment purchased with my credit card, even videos of early prototypes failing spectacularly on my kitchen table. The irony was delicious. Corovex had benefited from my innovation for years. I'd integrated the biofeedback system into their platforms, improved their safety metrics, and saved them millions in potential lawsuits. But I'd been careful, so careful, to maintain the separation between my invention and their employment. My phone buzzed. Ella. Just finished reviewing everything, she said without preamble. Your documentation is airtight. When were you planning to tell them? I wasn't, I replied, watching through my office window as Reeve glad-handed his way through the engineering floor. Let them make the first move. They'll announce the patent consolidation officially, probably claim it's already done. That's when we strike. Cold, Ella said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I like it. What about protection, once they realize? Already handled. I opened another drawer, revealing incorporation papers. Rowan Logic, LLC. Established last week. The patent transfer is ready to file the moment they try to claim ownership. You've thought of everything. Not everything, I admitted. Just enough. We spent the next hour strategizing. Ella would prepare cease and desist letters, ready to deploy. I would continue documenting any attempt by Corovex to claim my work. We'd wait for them to overplay their hand, and they would. Men like Reeve always did. The beauty of paragraph 7 wasn't just what it said, but what it represented. In their hunger for acquisition, in their rush to consume smaller companies and claim their assets. Corporations like Executive Holdings never did proper due diligence on old employment contracts. They assumed standardization. They assumed conformity. They assumed employees from a decade ago hadn't thought to protect themselves. But I had, because even at 22, fresh-faced and eager, I'd understood a fundamental truth: the only person who truly values your work is you. Companies will praise your innovation while planning to profit from it. They'll call you family while drafting termination letters. They'll shake your hand with one hand and pick your pocket with the other. That's why paragraph 7 existed. Not because I'd planned this exact scenario, but because I'd known, somehow, that one day, someone would try to take what I'd built with my own hands, in my own time, with my own vision. The biofeedback system represented 5 years of sleepless nights, 5 years of failed prototypes, burned circuit boards, and code that refused to compile. 5 years of my life poured into algorithms that could save lives. And now Colton Reeve thought he could sign a paper and own all of that. I closed the folder and locked it back in my drawer. Outside my office, Corovex hummed with nervous energy. Employees whispered about the changes, about what restructuring really meant, about who would survive the transition. They didn't know that the real restructuring hadn't begun yet. I pulled up the biofeedback system's core architecture on my screen, the real version, not the simplified one Corovex used. Hidden in the code were authentication protocols that no one else knew existed. A kill switch, if you will, though I preferred to think of it as a property rights enforcer. When the time came, and it would come soon, Reeve would learn that stealing intellectual property required more than corporate doublespeak and intimidation. It required actual ownership. And thanks to paragraph 7, that was the one thing he'd never have. The evidence gathering began that night. I transformed my apartment into a war room, every surface covered with documentation that would prove beyond doubt that the biofeedback system was mine and mine alone. First, the audio recordings. I'd been paranoid enough to record every late-night testing session on my phone, hours of my voice, tired and frustrated, muttering about servo response times and neural network training, timestamps clearly showing 2:30 a.m., 3:45 a.m., sometimes stretching until dawn, background noise of my coffee maker, my cat meowing, the garbage trucks that ran through my neighborhood at 5 a.m., all proof that this work happened in my space, on my time. Next came the receipts, Radio Shack purchases for basic components, Amazon orders for specialized sensors, that expensive oscilloscope I'd bought with my tax return in 2019. Every transaction paid from my personal accounts, delivered to my home address. I'd even kept the packaging, boxes with shipping labels that bore my name, not Corovex Technologies. The napkin sketches were my favorite piece of evidence. Late-night diner sessions where inspiration struck between bites of cold pie. Coffee-stained paper covered in circuit diagrams and mathematical proofs. The waitress at Murphy's Diner would probably remember me, the weird engineer who came in at midnight and left at 4 a.m., surrounded by crumpled napkins and empty coffee cups. But the crown jewel was the development journal, a simple notebook where I documented every breakthrough, every failure, every moment of clarity. Handwritten entries dated and timed, some smeared where coffee had spilled, others barely legible from exhaustion. No corporate engineer would keep such messy, personal records for company work. This was the journal of someone building something in their garage, not their office. Ella arrived at 9 p.m. with Chinese takeout and a box of legal documents. "You weren't kidding about the documentation," she said, surveying my organized chaos. "This is comprehensive." "Had to be," I replied, showing her the USB drive. "This contains the entire codebase, 23 versions, each with cryptographic timestamps from a third-party service, immutable proof of when each line was written." She whistled low. "You hash-stamped your code." Every commit, been paying for blockchain verification since 2018, seemed paranoid at the time. Paranoid or brilliant? She pulled out her laptop. "Let's formalize the transfer to Rowan Logic LLC. I've drawn up the papers. We'll backdate them to last week. Completely legal since you're transferring your own property to your own company." We worked through the night, building an impenetrable legal fortress around my creation. Every document was notarized, every transfer recorded, every piece of evidence cataloged and cross-referenced. By the time the sun rose, Rowan Logic LLC officially owned the complete rights to the biofeedback control system. "Now what?" Ella asked, exhausted but wired on caffeine and adrenaline. Now we wait, I said. Reeve will make his move soon. He has to. The quarterly investor meeting is in 3 weeks. He'll want to showcase the patent portfolio. And when he does. I smiled, thinking of the 17 contracts Corivex had signed with major industrial partners, every single one dependent on my biofeedback system, every single one containing a clause about valid patent ownership. When he does, we remind him that he should have read the fine print. Over the next week, I maintained perfect normalcy at work. I attended meetings, submitted reports, even complimented Reeve on his vision for the future during a department briefing, all while knowing that Rowan Logic LLC sat like a legal landmine, waiting for him to step on it. The paranoia that had driven me to document everything, to timestamp every breakthrough, to maintain that separation between my work and theirs, it had all been for this moment, not because I'd predicted Reeve specifically, but because I'd understood that innovation makes you a target, that companies would always try to claim what their employees created, regardless of when or where or how. Ella texted me updates as she filed the paperwork with the patent office, ensuring Rowan Logic's ownership was officially recorded. She also prepared something special, a detailed timeline showing how the biofeedback system couldn't possibly be work for hire under any interpretation of the law. You know what the beautiful part is, she said during one of our planning sessions. They probably have a whole team of lawyers who'll review standard employment contracts, but nobody ever checks the old ones. Nobody assumes a junior engineer from 2011 negotiated custom terms. She was right. In all his corporate maneuvering, Reeve had made the classic mistake of assuming everyone played by the same rules. He'd walked into Corivex seeing assets to be claimed, not bothering to verify that those assets were actually there for the taking. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Department review meeting, 2 p.m. This would be it. Reeve had scheduled individual meetings with all the senior engineers. He'd make his move then, probably with a carefully worded document about clarifying patent assignments. I gathered my files, checked that my phone's recording app was ready, and prepared for war. They thought they owned my nights, my sleepless hours, my moments of brilliance born from exhaustion and determination. They were about to learn otherwise. The conference room smelled of leather and ambition. Reeve sat at the head of the mahogany table, flanked by Helen Marsh from HR, and someone I didn't recognize, probably legal counsel, judging by the expensive suit and predatory smile. Juliet, thanks for joining us, Reeve began, gesturing to a chair across from him. The setup was deliberate, 3 against 1, corporate intimidation 101. I sat down, placing my phone face up on the table. The recording app blinked silently. Let's cut to the chase, Reeve said, sliding a manila folder across the table. We're finalizing the intellectual property consolidation. This is just a formality, clarifying that all patents developed during your employment belong to Corivex Technologies and its parent company. I opened the folder slowly, scanning the dense legal text. There it was, buried in paragraph 3. Employee acknowledges that all intellectual property, whether developed during business hours or personal time, utilizing any knowledge gained through employment, shall be assigned to Executive Holdings, LLC. Comprehensive, I murmured. Standard stuff, the lawyer, Matthews, according to his business card, interjected. Same agreement all senior engineers are signing. Just confirms what's already in your employment contract. I looked up, meeting Reeve's eyes. Actually, it doesn't. The room's temperature seemed to drop a degree. I'm sorry, Reeve's smile tightened. This document assumes my employment contract contains standard IP assignment clauses. It doesn't. Helen shuffled through her papers. That's impossible. All our contracts. All your contracts from 2012 onward, I corrected. I was hired in 2011. Different template, different terms. Matthews leaned forward. Even so, work-for-hire doctrine clearly states that work performed during employment using company resources belongs to the company, I finished. Key words being during employment and company resources. The biofeedback system was developed after hours, with my own equipment, in my own space. Reeves' face had gone from confident to confused to quietly furious. That's a technicality. No, that's the law. I pulled out my phone, sending a pre-written text to Ella. They made their move. Let's be reasonable here, Reeve tried, switching to his smooth negotiator voice. You've been well compensated for your work. Stock options, bonuses. For my employment, not for my independent innovations. You integrated that system into our platform. Under a licensing agreement, verbal, admittedly, but witnessed by the entire engineering team during the 2019 implementation meeting, I smiled. I believe the exact words were, "Jules is letting us use her baby." Everyone laughed. Nobody questioned the phrasing. Matthews was frantically typing on his laptop, probably searching for legal precedents. Helen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon, but Reeves' mask had finally slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "Nothing. I want nothing from you." I stood up, leaving the unsigned document on the table. My lawyer will be in touch regarding the proper licensing agreements going forward. Licensing agreements. For CoreVex's continued use of my biofeedback system, or would you prefer I invoke my rights as the patent holder? The implications hit them like a physical blow. 17 active contracts, millions in revenue, all dependent on technology they'd just discovered they didn't own. "You can't do this," Helen sputtered. "You've been using company time to maintain that system." "Wrong. I've been using company time to maintain CoreVex's implementation of my system. There's a difference. My lawyer has timesheets showing every hour spent on company work versus personal development, separated down to the minute." I reached the door before Reeves spoke again. "You planned this." I turned back. "No, I prepared for this. When you've been in this industry long enough, you learn the difference between a company that values innovation and one that simply acquires it. Guess which one you're running?" "We'll sue." "Please do. Discovery will be fascinating, especially when the court sees how you tried to retroactively claim ownership of pre-existing patents." I opened the door. "Oh, and Colton. You might want to review those 17 contracts. I believe there's a clause about patent authenticity, something about immediate termination if the licensing isn't properly maintained." I left them in stunned silence, walking back to my office with measured steps. Only when the door closed behind me did I allow myself a moment of satisfaction. My hands shook slightly as I dialed Ella. "How'd it go?" She answered on the first ring. "Exactly as expected. They tried the standard assignment. I declined. Reeves probably having Matthews tear apart my employment contract right now." "Let them. Judge Morrison owes me a favor. I can get an emergency injunction if they try anything stupid." "They will," I said, looking out at the engineering floor. "Desperate men always do." "Then we'd better be ready. I'm sending the formal license termination notice in 1 hour. That gives them time to realize what's happening, but not enough to prevent it." "Perfect." I started packing my personal items. Photos, my coffee mug, the small cactus that had survived longer than 3 CEOs. "I'll be leaving the building soon. They'll probably try to escort me out once they understand. Security Theater won't change the patent filing. You ready for what comes next?" I thought about the kill switch embedded in the biofeedback system, the authentication protocols that would lock out any unauthorized users, the chaos that would ensue when 17 clients discovered their critical safety systems had gone dark. "I've been ready for 12 years, I said. "Time to see if they've been paying attention." The next morning, Ella strode into CoreVex's executive conference room like she owned the place. I wasn't there. They'd had security escort me out the previous evening, but she live-streamed the whole thing to my phone. Modern technology allowing you to watch corporate titans crumble in real time from the comfort of your couch. The room was packed. Reeve, Matthews, Helen, and what looked like half the legal department. They'd done their homework overnight. Papers covered the table. Laptops hummed with frantic research, and at least 3 people had the hollow-eyed look of lawyers who'd mainlined caffeine instead of sleep. "Gentlemen, ladies," Ella began, setting her briefcase on the table with deliberate precision. I represent Rowan Logic, LLC and its proprietor, Juliet Rowan, in the matter of patent US 10-847293, the biofeedback control system currently implemented across your entire industrial platform. Matthews jumped in immediately. We've reviewed Ms. Rowan's employment contract. While there is an unusual clause regarding personal time development, the integration of this system into CoreVex's infrastructure clearly demonstrates— Nothing, Ella interrupted, pulling out a stack of documents. It demonstrates that my client licensed her technology to CoreVex. Here's the fun part. She did it verbally, as a courtesy, because she believed in the company's mission. That courtesy ends now. She distributed copies around the table. I zoomed in on my phone, catching glimpses of the pages. Formal termination of licensing rights, cease and desist orders, patent documentation with my name in bold letters. This is extortion, Reeves said, his voice dangerously quiet. This is property law, Ella corrected. Your own contracts with Fort Dynamics, Aegis Manufacturing, and 15 other clients specifically require that all technology be properly licensed. Section 12.3.4. If memory serves, failure to maintain proper licensing is grounds for immediate contract termination. The blood drained from Helen's face. She knew those contracts. She'd probably celebrated when they were signed. What are your terms? Matthews asked, ever the pragmatist. Ella smiled. Triple market rate for licensing, annual payments, not monthly, non-transferable, meaning you can't sub-license to subsidiaries, and— She paused for effect. Removal of Colton Reeves' name from any and all documentation related to the biofeedback system. That's ridiculous, Reeve exploded. I've been promoting this technology to investors. Then you've been committing fraud, Ella said smoothly. Claiming ownership of patents you don't hold, the SEC tends to frown on that. She pulled out her tablet, showing a timer. You have 47 hours to respond. After that, Rowan Logic will exercise its rights as patent holder. The system will be deactivated remotely, and you'll need to explain to 17 major clients why their safety systems went dark. You can't remotely deactivate, Matthews started. Authentication protocols built into the core architecture. My client was very thorough. Every system phones home to verify licensing. No valid license, no functionality, completely legal. It's in the technical documentation your engineers never bothered to read. I watched Reeves' face cycle through emotions: rage, disbelief, calculation, and finally, the dawning realization that he'd been outmaneuvered by someone he'd dismissed as just another engineer. Get out, he said quietly. 47 hours, Ella repeated, gathering her materials. Oh, and gentlemen, you might want to check the timestamps on those authentication servers. They've been logging every use of unlicensed technology for the past 18 hours. That's potentially millions in statutory damages. She left them in chaos. Matthews was already on the phone, probably with outside counsel. Helen was typing frantically, likely drafting emergency communications to clients. Others huddled around laptops, desperately searching for loopholes that didn't exist. And Reeves sat perfectly still, staring at the patent documentation like it might spontaneously combust if he focused hard enough. My phone rang. Ella, fresh from her victory. That was beautiful, I said. That was just the opening salvo. They'll try to negotiate. Probably offer you a fortune to sign everything over. Not interested. They'll threaten to destroy your career, blacklist you from the industry. Let them try. Rowan Logic already has 3 potential clients interested in licensing. Turns out, people want safety systems from someone who actually understands them. Speaking of which, Ella's voice carried a hint of mischief. I may have accidentally left my tablet recording when I walked out. Want to hear them panic? I listened to 5 minutes of corporate catastrophe. Engineers being called in to find workarounds that didn't exist. Accountants calculating the cost of contract breaches. Reeve demanding solutions from people who just discovered their golden goose was actually a cuckoo. Sir, the authentication is hard-coded into the kernel, one engineer explained. We'd need to rebuild everything from scratch. That's 18 months minimum, and we'd lose all the machine learning data. I don't want excuses. Reeves' composure had completely shattered. Find me options. There is one option, another voice suggested quietly. We could pay her. The silence that followed was deafening. I turned off the recording. In 47 hours, they'd either meet my terms or watch their empire crumble. Either way, Paragraph 7 had done its job. The little clause they'd laughed at 12 years ago had become their corporate nightmare, all because they'd assumed a junior engineer couldn't possibly protect herself. Assumptions, I reflected, were expensive things. The first domino fell at Fort Dynamics. Their chief operations officer called me directly at 7:15 a.m., bypassing Corovex entirely. Ms. Rowan, this is David Park. We've just received concerning documentation about patent ownership regarding our safety systems. I was sitting in my new office, a sleek space in a building exactly 1 block from Corovex's tower, close enough to watch the chaos, far enough to avoid the blast radius. Mr. Park, I said, swiveling to face the window. I assume you're calling about the licensing issue. Licensing issue. His voice cracked. We have a $40 million facility running on your biofeedback system. Are you telling me Corovex doesn't own the technology? I'm afraid not. I've provided them with 47 hours to negotiate proper licensing terms. After that, I let the silence speak for itself. This is unacceptable. Our contract specifically states that all technology must be properly licensed. Section 12.3.4, I believe. Perhaps you should discuss this with Mr. Reeve. The call ended abruptly. Through my window, I could see Corovex's building. Somewhere up there, phones were starting to ring. By noon, the avalanche had begun. Aegis Manufacturing threatened to pull out. Steelbridge Industries demanded an emergency meeting. A Department of Defense contractor sent a formal inquiry that probably had Reeves' lawyers reaching for antacids. Ella texted me updates between meetings. Twitter's caught wind. #PatentGate is trending. I pulled up the feed. Someone had leaked the story. Probably a disgruntled Corovex employee watching their stock options evaporate. Tech reporters were having a field day. Breaking Corovex Technologies may not own core patent for flagship safety system. CEO Colton Reeve accused of IP theft. Stock down 12% in pre-market trading. The phone rang. Unknown number. Jules. A familiar voice. Sarah Martinez. My former team lead. What the hell is happening? Reeve just locked down the entire engineering floor. Nobody can access the biofeedback repositories. He's probably trying to prevent leaks. Too late. Tommy already copied everything to prove we didn't steal it. Jules, is it true you own the whole system? Every line of code. She whistled. Holy shit. You know what this means? Without the biofeedback system, we're just another automation company. Nothing special, nothing worth the premium prices. I know. Good. Her voice turned fierce. After what they tried to burn it down. The sentiment was spreading. Ella forwarded me screenshots from an anonymous employee Slack channel. Engineers who'd watched corporations consume innovations for years were cheering for the underdog. Someone had even made a meme Reeves' face photoshopped onto the Titanic, labeled HMS Patent Theft, heading straight for an iceberg marked Paragraph 7. At 2:30 p.m., an emergency board meeting was called. I knew because 3 different insiders texted me. The board had discovered that their new CEO's first major action might tank the company's value. Then came the revelation that made everything sweeter. Ella called, barely containing her laughter. You're not going to believe this. I just got off the phone with a Washington Post reporter. Apparently, Reeves' been shopping the biofeedback system to investors as his flagship innovation. He's been taking credit in every interview, every pitch deck. Fraud. At minimum, misrepresentation. The SEC's definitely going to investigate. But here's the kicker. One of those investors is Maxwell Sterling. I knew that name. Everyone in tech did. Sterling had a reputation for destroying executives who lied to him. How long before? He's already called an emergency audit. Reeves about to learn what happens when you sell someone else's work to a billionaire. The pressure was building from every angle. Clients demanding answers, investors smelling blood, employees jumping ship, and at the center of it all, Colton Reeve, the man who'd walked into Corovex thinking he could simply take what he wanted. My phone buzzed. An email from Matthews, marked urgent, confidential. Ms. Rowan, in the interest of resolving this matter quickly, Mr. Reeve is prepared to offer you $2 million for full patent assignment. I forwarded it to Ella with 2 words, not interested. The response came within minutes, $5 million. Then, $10 million in a board position. Finally, name your price. I crafted my response carefully. Mr. Matthews, there is no price. Rowan Logic will license the technology under the terms already presented. Triple market rate, annual payments, Mr. Reeves' name removed from all documentation. These terms are non-negotiable. The 47-hour deadline approached like a storm front. I'd given them Thursday and Friday to scramble. Now, as Saturday dawn approached, the authentication servers waited for my command. I opened my laptop and pulled up the admin panel. Every Corovex system running my biofeedback technology showed as active. Green lights across 17 installations, humming along, unaware they were 1 click away from darkness. Ella texted, 10 minutes to deadline. They're still in emergency session. I waited, finger hovering over the kill switch, not out of cruelty, but necessity. They needed to understand that innovation couldn't be stolen just because you wore an expensive suit and signed acquisition papers. At 5:59 a.m., my phone rang. Ms. Rowan. Matthew sounded exhausted. We accept your terms. Monday morning arrived with surgical precision. 8:59 a.m. I sat in my office, watching the authentication dashboard on one screen and Corovex's stock price on another. Everything was in place. Ella stood behind me, phone in hand. Ready. Send it. She tapped her screen. Done. License termination notice delivered to all 17 clients simultaneously. 9 a.m. Exactly. I entered the command sequence I'd memorized years ago. My fingers moving with practiced certainty, a simple string of characters that would flip every biofeedback system from green to red. Enter. The dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree in hell. One by one, systems began failing authentication. Fort Dynamics, offline. Aegis Manufacturing, offline. Steelbridge Industries, offline. 17 installations across 3 continents, suddenly dead in the water. My phone exploded with notifications, Ella's too, but we ignored them all, watching the cascade of failures with clinical detachment. How long before Ella started? The office door burst open. 3 Corovex security guards stood there, looking confused and slightly embarrassed. Ma'am, we've been asked to escort you. The lead guard paused. Wait, you don't work here anymore. No, I agreed. I don't. You're probably looking for my former office. This is Rowan Logic headquarters. They exchanged glances and retreated. Through my window, I could see Corovex's building. Even from here, the chaos was visible. People running between floors, clusters forming at windows, the universal body language of corporate panic. Twitter had already picked up the story. Had Corovex, down was trending within minutes. Plant managers posting photos of dead screens. Safety inspectors demanding explanations. One particularly memorable image showed a multi-million-dollar production line frozen mid-operation, captioned, "When you forget to pay your licensing fees." Ella's phone rang. She put it on speaker. Ms. Quinn Matthews sounded like he'd aged a decade overnight. We agreed to your terms. This is exactly what we discussed, Ella interrupted. You agreed to terms at 5:59 a.m. Saturday. The formal licensing agreement clearly states that service will resume upon receipt of the first annual payment and completion of all documentation changes. We're prepared to wire the money immediately. Excellent. I'll also need confirmation that Mr. Reeves' name has been removed from all patent documentation, marketing materials, and technical specifications. Silence. That's going to take... Then I suggest you hurry. Every minute of downtime is costing your clients approximately— Ella made a show of checking her notes— $3.7 million in lost productivity. She hung up and high-fived me. God, that felt good. The next hour was a masterclass in corporate humiliation. Coravex's PR team tried spinning it as a technical glitch, then a scheduled maintenance, before finally admitting to licensing reconciliation. But the truth was already out. Every tech blog, industry newsletter, and business reporter knew exactly what had happened. Colton Reeve, the CEO who tried to steal an engineer's patent, had just cost his company millions in a single morning. By 11 a.m., screenshots started circulating, internal emails where Reeve had claimed credit for the biofeedback system, presentation slides with his name prominently displayed next to my innovations, a particularly damning video from an investor conference where he described his vision for the technology I'd built in my garage. Then came the notification I'd been waiting for. Wire transfer confirmed, Ella announced. $8.4 million, first year's licensing fee for all 17 installations. And Reeve's name. She refreshed her email. Legal just sent confirmation. Every document has been updated. He's been completely erased from the patent history. I turned back to my authentication dashboard. Time to flip the switches back to green. One by one. I restored service to each installation. Fort Dynamics first. They'd been polite. Aegis Manufacturing next. Down the list. Each system coming back online with a cheerful ping. 15 minutes later, everything was running again. The crisis was over, but the scars would remain. Coravex's reputation was in tatters. Their stock price had dropped 18%, and Colton Reeve's name was mud in every boardroom from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. Sarah Martinez texted me. Just watched Reeve get escorted out by security. The board fired him, effective immediately. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. That wasn't the point. The point was the 8-figure licensing fee that would fund Rowan Logic's expansion. The point was the message sent to every corporate raider who thought they could claim an engineer's midnight innovations. The point was paragraph 7. Ella poured 2 glasses of champagne from the bottle she'd been saving. To proper documentation. To reading the fine print, I countered. We clinked glasses, watching the city skyline where Coravex's building stood slightly less tall than it had that morning. Somewhere in that tower, lawyers were explaining to a shell-shocked board how a single paragraph from 2011 had cost them their CEO and nearly their company. My computer chimed, a new email, this time from Sterling Technologies. Ms. Rowan, I understand you're now licensing your biofeedback system independently. We'd be very interested in discussing implementation for our European facilities. Also, I apologize for any distress my prior dealings with Mr. Reeve may have caused. I assure you, all future negotiations will be conducted with proper respect for intellectual property rights. I smiled. The market had already adjusted. The predators had learned that this particular prey had teeth. What now? Ella asked. I pulled up the dashboard one more time. 17 green lights, each representing a system that now ran on my terms, with my name, under my control. Now we build something better, something they can't steal. Outside, Coravex's logo still gleamed in the morning sun, but everyone in the industry now knew the truth. The real power hadn't been in their boardroom. It had been in a kitchen at 2:17 a.m., in the hands of an engineer who'd thought to protect what she created. The dust settled over the next 48 hours like ash after a volcanic eruption. Coravex's emergency board meeting stretched through Monday night and into Tuesday morning. By the time they emerged, 3 more executives had been terminated, and a forensic audit was underway to determine exactly how many other oversights existed in their patent portfolio. I didn't gloat. There was too much work to do. Rowan Logic LLC had gone from a protective shell company to a legitimate operation overnight. My phone rang constantly. CEOs who'd previously ignored my existence suddenly wanted to explore synergies. Venture capitalists who'd never returned my emails were now offering term sheets. The same industry that had watched Coravex try to steal my work was now tripping over itself to prove they were different. They weren't, but their money was still green. Wednesday afternoon, I stood in my office, looking across at Corvex's building one last time. Moving trucks were already pulling up. The company would survive. Companies like that always did. But they'd never again assumed that employment meant ownership. Ella knocked and entered, carrying a box. Final documentation from their lawyers. Every trace of Reeves' name has been purged. It's like he never existed in the patent history. Good. She set the box on my desk and pulled out a single sheet of paper. There's one more thing. A personal note from the board chairman. I read it quickly. An apology, carefully worded to admit no legal wrongdoing while acknowledging regrettable misunderstandings regarding intellectual property. They wished me well in my future endeavors. I fed it to the shredder. You know what the irony is, I said, watching the paper turn to confetti. If they'd just asked, if Reeve had come to me honestly and negotiated fairly, I would have given them a reasonable rate, maybe even preferred pricing for being my first major implementation. But they didn't ask, Ella said. They tried to take, I corrected. Big difference. My computer chimed with another licensing inquiry, this time from a Japanese manufacturing consortium. The biofeedback system was going global, and every contract would have my name on it, not buried in fine print or hidden behind corporate veils, but prominently displayed, developed by Juliet Rowan. That evening, I returned to my apartment and pulled out the old notebook, the one filled with coffee-stained sketches and 2 a.m. revelations, page after page of ideas that had seemed impossible at the time, dreams scribbled in the margins of exhaustion. I flipped to a page dated 5 years ago, there, in handwriting made shaky by too much caffeine. I'd written, "They'll try to take this someday. Be ready." Even then, some part of me had known. The corporate world didn't reward innovation. It consumed it. But if you were smart, if you were careful, if you read every line of every contract and protected what was yours, you could turn their hunger against them. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Martinez. "Drinks tonight? The whole engineering team wants to celebrate your victory." I smiled but declined. This wasn't about victory. It never had been. I made myself coffee. Not the expensive stuff from the office machines, but the same cheap brand I'd drunk during all those late-night development sessions. Then I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and started working on the next innovation. Because that's what engineers do. We build things. We solve problems. We create value from nothing but ideas and determination. And if we're very lucky, or very careful, we get to keep what we create. The authentication dashboard glowed on my second monitor. All green lights, all systems running smoothly. 17 installations of my biofeedback system, saving lives and preventing accidents around the world, each one bearing my name, running under my terms, generating revenue for my company. All because of paragraph 7. All because 12 years ago, a young engineer had insisted on adding one small clause to her employment contract. A clause that everyone had ignored, dismissed, forgotten about. Until they needed it. Until it mattered. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to that younger version of myself. The one who'd been paranoid enough to protect her future innovations. The one who'd known that someday, someone would try to steal what she built in those quiet hours before dawn. Colton Reeve had walked into Corvex thinking he could take whatever he wanted. He'd left in disgrace. His name erased from the very innovations he'd tried to claim. The board had learned an $8 million lesson about due diligence. The entire tech industry had watched a cautionary tale unfold in real time. And me, I sat in my kitchen at 11:45 p.m., sketching out new ideas on fresh napkins, building the next thing they'd someday try to steal. Only this time, everyone would know better. This time, they'd read the fine print. This time, they'd remember paragraph 7. Because in the end, that's all it had taken. One paragraph, one engineer who refused to let her work be stolen. One moment when the system designed to consume innovation had choked on its own assumptions. I closed my notebook and looked out the window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, in boardrooms and executive suites. They were updating their employment contracts, adding new clauses, trying to close the loophole I'd exploited. Let them. I'd already moved on to the next idea, the next innovation, the next thing worth protecting. And I'd make damn sure to document every second of it. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate revenge and clever engineering, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Jules' position? Let me know in the comments.